playing a musical instrument. I love it. So childish, but brilliant.
Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol Ped, and welcome to the all-new Aston Martin Vantage. Now, thanks to the guys at Aston Martin Chichester, this is actually the third time I've been able to shoot a video with this car. And unusually for me, normally I get to drive high-performance cars or supercars on the road and always wonder what they would be like on track. With Vantage, I went to the launch event that Aston Martin Chichester did, and then, about a month ago now, I drove this car on track at Silverstone and experienced what it's like at the very edge, and it is a superb car on track, but I've been desperate to get it out on the road and drive it in, if you like, normal driving conditions. So this car's mine for the next few hours. So I thought before we take it out for a drive, we'll have a look round it and have a bit of a chat about this car. There are things people love about this car, there are things that are maybe a bit divided opinion, but let's have a good look round the outside and then we will take it up the road for a spin, because this car is absolutely stunning on the road. It makes an amazing noise. So if we're going to start to have a look around the car, we should probably start at the front, because maybe this is the most controversial aspect of the car. It has this lovely kind of almost shark-like look to it. Massive, great big air intake there for the engine. We'll talk more about what's under the bonnet in a moment. But maybe the most controversial bit are these lights. And I know lots of comments I've had on the two videos I've done so far on Vantage. People aren't sure about the lights, maybe they're too small. They've grown on me a great deal, and I know they are un-Aston-like, but you've got to grow the design language. And when I was up at Gaydon recently, what I found really interesting, they had DB11, the new Vantage, and the new DBS Superleggera all parked next to each other in the atrium, and you can see this evolution of the design language. So I know that they are going to be a debatable thing, but I quite like that in a car, when a car causes that debate, that clash, that sort of love-hate relationship. I think that's great. But for me, I really like the front end of the car. It took a little bit of time to grow on me, but it just has this kind of purposeful, and I love the shark-like nature of it too. So we've started with the front. The other thing to note, by the way, the front end of that car, if you've seen Spectre, the James Bond film, the link between this car and DB10, so Sam Mendes, the producer of that film, was at Gaydon, saw some of the concept design sketches for Vantage, fell in love with it, and that's really the thing that inspired DB10. That's why these two cars look so similar. But as we walk round the side of the car, what I really like as well is this sculpting around the wheel arch to let that high pressure out the wheel arch. It comes down the side of the car, really lovely haunches on the side. And then you get to the back, and for me, the back of this car is just epic. So let's have a bit of a chat. There is, however, one thing I don't like about the rear of the Vantage. So what's not to like about the rear of this car? I've got this lovely kind of line of LED lights that look brilliant in the dark when you're following one of these and under braking on a circuit. And you've got all the kind of diffuser work under there. Lovely. The thing I don't like, and you can fix it, but this car, it has the standard exhaust, and I'm sorry Aston, but that's just not a big enough exhaust pipe. It just doesn't quite look right. It sounds brilliant, it just doesn't look right. There is a 2-pipe or quad tailpipe option, and if I was speccing one of these, I would almost certainly go for that, because I just think it makes the rear of the car look that much better. But that's me being really picky. Exhaust is too small, rest of the car, look at that, it's wicked. Now this is a sports car, but it has a pretty decent sized boot. And Aston Martin say you can get a set of golf clubs in it, so I reckon we should give it a try. And I have to say, well, with the exception of my driver, you could easily get a set of golf clubs in there, and then you would probably just put the driver on the angle, or yeah, maybe just don't take your driver with you, but yeah, you can get a set of golf clubs in there. Nearly. Actually, the fix to the golf club driver dilemma is this actually really useful parcel shelf. So you can obviously fill the boot space here, or you can put stuff there, or you can just drop it forward, and there we go. There's my driver in the car. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. So I think you'll agree the boot is a good space. But finally, let's have a bit of a chat about maybe the final controversial thing about what's under the bonnet. And that's the fact that it's an AMG V8 under the bonnet. 4-litre twin turbocharged V8, sourced from AMG, but it is running Aston Martin software. So it is an Aston Martin engine, but obviously it's just coming from AMG. It produces 503 bhp, 506 foot-pounds of torque, and the performance figures of the car, 0 to 60, 3.6 seconds, top end 195 miles an hour. And certainly from my experience in driving the car, it is an absolute gem of an engine. Very responsive, loads of torque, lots of kind of drivability, and the soundtrack that you get once that noise comes through the engine, through the exhaust and out the back of the car is something else. So let's pop inside the car, have a chat about a stunning interior before we take this car up the road for a drive. That's the bit I'm always really excited by. Now then, you've always got to love an Aston interior, and I think the Vantage interior is very different from what's come before. For some people maybe a tad complex, but there's some really interesting stuff in here. So first thing that's gone is the emotion control unit. So you get a standard keyless entry key. You don't have the kind of plug-in key, which I think is a bit of a shame because I used to quite like the emotion control unit. So you've just got basically an array of little buttons here, engine start stop at the top, and then you've got park, ride, park, reverse, neutral and drive. So your standard automatic box. You can drive on the paddles, and I'll talk more about that when we get out on the road. You've then got quite a lot of different buttons here. So the MMI in this car is derived from Daimler-Benz. It's the same as you would find in DB11. So you've got a screen there. It's not touch screen, so you control it by this little paddle arrangement here. And then there's lots of the kind of buttons that you would need on an everyday basis just there. So everything from kind of turning things like traction control off, switching between nav and radio and so on. It's all done with buttons just there. And then you've got this other little array here, which for me, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of drivers that will like touchscreen. We live in a touchscreen world now with things like Apple and Android phones all being touchscreen, but there is something tactile about having a proper button. I think that just the main thing you'd have to think about is there's so many there when you're driving, maybe especially at night time, how easy it is to kind of locate the right button that you need. Steering wheel is lovely. You've got that kind of square 177 inspired steering wheel, really nice view out of the cockpit. You are sat very low in this car. I found when I was driving it on track, one of the things, certainly finding the apex on that side of the car was a little bit tricky because you're kind of doing this all the time. But the driving position, you kind of sit into the car and you're kind of surrounded in this lovely cocoon. Now, one of the things I mentioned on the DBS launch was DBS Superleggera has exactly the same air vents as Vantage. And on first inspection, you look at those and you think, I don't know whether I like those so much. They kind of don't quite sit there. However, they do a really good job and they're really quick and easy to use. So I kind of half understand those now. I just still think maybe they could have been a little bit nicer. But the rest of this cabin, this car's been spec'd beautifully. With my recent trip up to Gaydon to kind of see how all of this is made, their headliner in this car is beautiful. You get that lovely access to the little parcel shelf at the back, pretty good rear visibility, so a very lovely place to be. So I think it would be rude not to. The next thing we need to do is start this car and just have a listen to the engine. Oh yes. So beautiful inside and out, I think you'll agree. One final thing, if you ever drove the old Vantage, it used to have the handbrake here, which was always a bit weird. And obviously we kind of got all the controls in the centre, and I was thinking, where's the handbrake? It's an electronic handbrake now rather than the old fly-off handbrake, but it's just there. So if you ever drive a Vantage and want to know where the handbrake is, it's there. But it's about time we take this car out on the road because I just want to get driving. So I think we take it to some of my favourite roads. This should be good fun.
So here we are, guys, out on the road in the brand new Aston Martin Vantage. Now sadly, I don't have this car for a huge amount of time, so I'm going to do my very best to sort of talk through what in essence is actually a fairly complex car to really get your head around. First things first, from a drivetrain point of view, it's got an 8-speed ZF box. You can drive it in fully automatic, just stick it in D and off you go. And I guess if you were off to the south of France and you wanted to kind of cruise, you would probably do that. Having said that, for me, it's straight onto the paddles. Although it's not a dual clutch box, the gear change on the paddles is pretty sharp. It's not as sharp as something like a Porsche PDK, but it is very, very good, and there's not too much hesitation, which I really like. Second thing is we've got 3 settings for the suspension and 3 settings for the throttle and those types of things. So suspension wise, you've got normal, Sport Plus and track. The normal is very compliant. Sport Plus actually isn't too bad. You select them on the steering wheel with these little buttons. It just firms it up a little bit, and actually for me on a day-to-day basis, that's the setting I would probably have this car in. The track mode, it's called track for a reason. I think certainly on British roads I wouldn't drive it on the road, but when I had this at Silverstone on the track, we clearly had it in that setting, and it's very sharp, firms things up really nicely. On the other side of the steering wheel, I've got Sport, Sport Plus and Track. Now the important thing here is, as well as doing things like sharpening up the throttle, that starts to have a bit of an impact on what happens at the rear end of the car with that lovely exhaust note. Now interestingly, this car isn't fitted with the Sports exhaust, which I understand is a little bit louder, but to be honest, this is loud enough. So when you're in sport mode, you've got a grumbly V8, you've got lots of menacing noises coming from underneath the bonnet, but it's not a hooligan. And again, I can imagine many Vantage owners on a day-to-day basis, you'd stick it into that mode. When you put it into Sport Plus, however, you start to get a little bit of the menace come. You start to get a few pops and cracks on overrun, and you start to be able to hear those delicious kind of noises. When you put it in track, however, it just turns into an absolute weapon of a car, and you can really play on the throttle, on and off, and you can create cracks and pops on upshift and downshift, and it is properly raucous. Again, I think you would probably bore, well no, actually I wouldn't bore of that at all, but a lot of people would probably bore of that and not drive it in that mode too often. But for me, I've got this car for such a short period of time, I'm going to be driving it in that quite a lot of the time. So interesting drive modes in this car. So let's drop it into the Sport Plus mode from the steering wheel. I've got a little bit more response. Interestingly, when this car is ticking over and you change it from Sport to Sport Plus, you can hear the valve in the exhaust open and you can hear the engine tone change. If I just drop it down a couple of cogs. Oh yeah. Yeah, so you get that instant engagement, that instant noise. This engine, and again, you know, we did a bit of a chat about the engine when I had the bonnet lifted. A few people have kind of said, oh, Aston Martin with an AMG engine in it. Look, AMG make one of the best V8s in the world. Why not use it? You know, and from a traction point of view, it's hugely impressive. The big thing you do have to worry about with this car, though, is the speedo. It moves so quickly. And you've got this auditory pleasure coming. Now, one of the things I missed out on when I drove this car on track was the noise, because I had a crash helmet on. You just can't hear anything. But when you're driving this car without a crash helmet on, even with the windows up, it makes a brilliant noise. It's just an epic thing. So yeah, here we go. Into third, into second. Lovely sharp pointy front end. Lots of power on the exit of the this thing's just brilliant. Lots of power on the exit. Very confidence inspiring, this car. The suspension's so nice and compliant. The front end is excellent, and even at kind of driving speeds that are acceptable on UK roads. It gives a huge amount of engagement. The gearbox is sharp and precise. Oh man. Oh dear me. Yeah. I knew this car would be really good on the road. When you're on a track, the things you ask of a car are just so much beyond most cars' comfort zone. You're accelerating hard, you've got lots of forces going through the suspension. The brakes are asked to do a lot because you're braking from such high speeds. And you really kind of, if a car is going to have weaknesses, you really find them out on track. You then have to dial it back a little bit for the road. And this car was by no means disappointing on track whatsoever. But you kind of get it on the road and it's so much more capable than you're ever going to need on the road. You can really drive it and know that you're well within the bounds of the car, well within its capabilities. Well, Sport Plus is good fun. However, in the short time I have with the car, let's engage Manic Mode. First of all, you get a much more throttle response. You get a really car that feels really up for it. I'm going to just put the window down a tad and hopefully there you go, and you get these delicious cracks on upshift. You get a big kind of overrun of popples and bangs and oh wow. Aston Martin, you know, the old Vantage, I love the old Vantage. I was really privileged. I drove the V12 Vantage S, the roadster version, but I drove it on a wet and cold day. It was pretty scary, to be honest. And then a little bit of traction control helping me out there. And you get to third and fourth and you have to back off. Yeah, the old Vantage was a pretty brutish car. The V12 one had lots of torque, lots of horsepower, and it did scare me a little bit. This is a really approachable car. It's fast, it's got over 500 horsepower, you rear wheel drive, you've got all the engagement, but it's not frightening me. It's just so supportive to the driver, and I really like that. I think it just makes it a really approachable car for lots and lots of drivers. And it's this kind of multitasking car that I like. So you know, you've got a pretty decent sized boot. You can put a lot of stuff in there. We've seen that already. You could pack it full of stuff. You could take it on a long cruise. So you know, it's got that mix between GT cruiser and you know, sticking it in drive and just driving it in all the sport modes and the comfort modes. And you do that when you go on the holidays, and then you drive all the way to the south of France. You empty the boot of your stuff, you drive to Paul Ricard, stick it in track mode and absolutely smash the circuit. And I think that multi-role it's been done brilliantly by Aston Martin. Oh man, it's really interesting. This car's the kind of car you would want a bit more seat time just to really understand where its limits are. But when you jump straight in it, it's very welcoming and really helps you out. But it's got that element of bruteness and kind of ruggedness that you really want in a sports car. And on the road, it's certainly, for me, the most sports car feeling Aston Martin I've driven, and I've been lucky. I've driven quite a few, certainly the recent ones, and it's just got that edginess. Now, does it have the edginess to compare it to something like a 911? I've driven a lot of 911s. Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't want to upset the kind of Porsche fanboys out there and start saying whether it's better or worse. It's different, but it's that kind of market that this car is aimed at. These cars start at about 120,000 quid. I've mentioned already, you're not going to buy one of these for 120,000 pounds. Not by the time you start to spec it. This car's been beautifully specced as well. But when you start chucking it about and you come into corners, it starts making noises. It's just so pointy and squirty. Now, one of the things, when I had this car on track, it's got steel brakes. On the road, those steel brakes are ample, amazing stopping power. When I had the car on track, they just started to feel wanting, just at the end when we'd had a few laps and you're braking from very high speed. I have it on good authority, however, that carbon ceramic brakes as an option are coming to Vantage very soon. But on the road, these steels are they do the job. They're brilliant. And when you get out the corner, it's just going, come on, baby. Yeah. This car's good. Oh, man. I think this car's really clever. I think it will appeal to a very wide range of potential buyers for Aston Martin. It's got the kind of the long-legged GT characteristics that you might want from an Aston for long road trips and plenty of luggage space in the back. But it's got this sporty nature that's just delicious, and this engine soundtrack. Oh my goodness me. You just drive this car on a daily basis with the biggest smile on your face ever. And when you get to a corner and you can just drop it down a gear and you can put that sharp, sharp nose into a corner, it's a wicked thing. So I have to say a huge thank you to James at Aston Martin Chichester for letting me play with his new demonstrator. This car is a demonstrator. Give him a call and ask to drive it. Make sure you mention my name, of course. But it's just brilliant, this thing. But yeah, massive thanks to James. I've wanted to drive this car for a long time and it's not disappointed. It's just brilliant. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that film. If you have done so, give me a thumbs up. Comments below are always welcome. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol for plenty more content to come. And from the driver's seat of the new Aston Martin Vantage, I'll see you on the next film, guys. You take care. Drive safe. Sadly, I'm going to have to return this car, but I might just have it just for another half an hour or so. Just drive it a little bit more. Just listen to that. Oh, I love this car. Why do I have to take it back? I don't want to take it back. I want to carry on driving it all day. Anyway, you take care, guys. Drive safe.